All right, everyone has to accept that, I think. So, welcome. Uh, I thank everyone for attending tonight, our fourth installment in a four-part series called Train a Brain Tuesday. Tonight's topic is going to be on on reading, the skills that are required and kind of some of the drills that we use in our clinic at LearningRx to strengthen so that reading is easier for our students. Um, eh, eh, with me tonight is Sandy Zamalis. She's going to be managing the chat room. And so we encourage people to use the chat aggressively to ask questions. Sandy is the owner in Stanton and Harrisonburg, the two centers uh, over the mountain from me in Charlottesville. My name is Dargan, and I am the owner of the LearningRx Center in Charlottesville. Before we get started with kind of the presentation portion, I'd like for each one of you to put in chat. Obviously, reading is something you're particularly interested in, likely for your child, but I'd like you to put in the chat in one or two sentences or phrases. Describe what is hard for your child when it comes to reading, because I want to make sure that we address all of those either in the presentation or the Q&A. So I'm going to give you a minute or two to chat in a description of what is hard, what is difficult, what gets them frustrated when it comes to reading. I'll give you another minute or two. I see Don Hollenbeck, who is the LearningRx Center owner in Fairfax, has joined us as well, and Leesburg. He has two centers in the Northern Virginia area. Sandy, are you digesting some of the responses?
Yep, we're getting some good ones, so I'll compile them for us as we go through.
That'll be great. All right. So, Sandy, if you can compile those and make sure that we address those, or you can bring them up at appropriate times, that would be great. All right, can everyone see my presentation deck?
I can see it.
Okay. Let me get my... All right, let's start. I don't know why my deck is not advancing. Hold on. Now I think I've got it. Now, can we see it? All right. Can everyone see reading problems are widespread?
Yes.
All right. So when we talk about reading struggles in our country, reading struggles are widespread. We have something called, you may have heard about it, but it's called the Nation's Report Card. And the National Assessment of Education Progress puts it together. They polled a variety of kind of institutional schools, from private to public. And in 2019, 65% of fourth graders were below proficient in reading. So get your arms around that statistic. Only 35% of fourth graders were proficient or above. That is a fairly frightening statistic. They don't poll homeschool families as part of that, but we have no reason to believe that distribution. I mean, this is like something like 13,000 children that they assessed in kind of each grade level, something like 130,000 kind of across the board. It's likely that those problems persist in the homeschool audience as well. So we're talking about a major problem in this country because reading is primarily how we learn in this culture. So that's how persistent and large the problem is. Let's talk a little bit about the process of reading. So can everyone see now the new diagram? Did the slide advance? Okay. So this is what happens when someone is actually reading. Let's look at the blue and the green loop here. Let me turn on my spotlight so you guys can see that. When an individual looks at symbols, we call them codes, letters on a page. They identify them as letters in the formation of a word. Either they recognize the word within this process takes about 150 milliseconds. They recognize and kind of automatically process the word. They check their vocabulary for their understanding or meaning of the word. They likely create a picture, an image of that word in their head. They evaluate kind of the context of that word within the sentence, within the paragraph, and does it make sense to be there? And then they begin to kind of deeply comprehending what they are decoding. This is the loop that happens very quickly for every word a proficient reader reads. And again, it's just a little more than kind of a tenth of a second. Now, what happens if the reader, it's a struggling reader? Then there are a couple of other loops that the reader may go through. First of all, let's assume they know the word and they recognize they can read the word, but they don't recognize what the word is. They don't know the meaning of the word. And so they begin to lose context, or they guess at the meaning of the word and they're back to square one because the word doesn't, the meaning that they have for the word doesn't fit in the context of the sentence. That's one loop where a struggling reader, kind of the comprehension loop, has kind of a breakdown. The loop that we're going to look at tonight and talk mostly about tonight is what happens if the reader doesn't recognize the word. They kind of look at the visual symbols, they analyze those symbols, and they begin to associate sounds that they retrieve from their memory to those symbols. But if their brain doesn't allow them to associate the correct sound with the symbol, then they're going to be unable to properly blend those sounds together. If they do not know the sounds that go with the visual symbols, they won't be able to sound out the word at all, and again results in the same place of failure. So this is what is happening when you see your child looking at the printed page. They can go through a couple of different loops. And so this is the process behind reading. Now let's look at some of the skills associated with reading. All right. So this is the learning model. And for those of you that have been with us for the last few weeks, I'm going to talk about the learning model as it applies specifically to reading. So as a home educator, let me turn on my spotlighting tool. As a home educator, you kind of live in this realm. This is the academic realm. This is the realm of curriculum, right? Your job is to expose your child to curriculum, and then however you test mastery of that, how you demonstrate adequate yearly progress, that's your choice. But you typically live in the world of academics, content, curriculum. What I want to look at are the brain skills, the thinking skills, the cognitive skills that we use to convert symbols that we see on a page into meaning and knowledge, so you then may test the mastery, the comprehension, the understanding of what your child is doing. And so the first thing that we have to do is we have to recognize the visual symbols, right? The individual letters and the combinations of letters that make words. This uses our visual processing skills. We have to, again, recognize these symbols as letters and combinations of letters. First step in the reading process. Then we use what is called our auditory processing skills. And when we say auditory processing, we don't mean like you go to an audiologist to test your hearing. We mean, how does your brain neurologically hear, analyze, manipulate units of sound? So when we say auditory processing, you scan for the visual symbol, then you have to do an auditory interpretation of the sounds and letter combinations that you're looking at, and how these sounds link together to form the grammatical structures and spellings of symbols and whole words. So this is where analysis of sound, blending of sound occurs. This is the key, one of the key underlying skills to being a proficient reader. So our language is an oral language. It's made up of discrete units of sounds, which we call phonemes, and letters are just representations of those sounds. So reading is actually an auditory task, because even if you're doing it silently, you're converting visual symbols two sounds and then gluing those sounds together to make words that then have meaning. And so keep in mind that reading fundamentally is an auditory task, even if you do it quietly. So we'll demonstrate some of the auditory processing drills that we use in our clinic. But the next skill that I wanted to show you are logic and reasoning and long-term memory. So provided that we recognize the symbol, we can associate the right sounds, glue those sounds together. We then check our database, which is our long-term memory, for do we know the meaning of that word, those combinations of sounds. So kind of checking vocabulary. We then, does that word, does that meaning fit within the context of the sentence or the paragraph or the story that we're reading? So you'll recall in our second episode of Train a Brain, we talked about the importance of long-term memory and things we could do to strengthen the long-term memory, which is where many of those sound symbol relationships reside. All right. Then the next grouping of skills that is important in reading, and these were the subject of the first Train a Brain Tuesday and the second Train a Brain Tuesday, are attention and working memory. So as we are scanning the page, we have to stay on task. We have to focus on the conversion of the visual symbols to sounds, the gluing of the sounds together, the checking of the database. If we get distracted by music playing in the next room, if our attention starts to wander, then we break away from the decoding, from the reading. So attention is important to stay on task. And then working memory is essential because as we are converting individual symbols to sounds and gluing those sounds together, we have to hold them in immediate awareness in our temporary storage unit, our working memory, while we're gluing them together to come up with the word to check from in the long term, kind of in the file cabinet or on the hard drive. And we have to keep track of what words we read prior to the target word so that we're able to hold the words in continuity to start forming a thought, an image to deeply comprehend what we're reading. So attention and working memory, which sit on the front end of our skill set, are critical to be, for them to be strong, to be a proficient reader. Then the last skill is processing speed. So to fluently read a paragraph requires processing letters into sounds, like we said, in 150 milliseconds. So adequately comprehending what you're reading, it has to take place and be synchronized at the same rate that we're conversing, that the rate at which we speak. If the processing speed is slow and labored, we're not going to be able to blend the sounds together quickly enough to be able to retrieve the meaning, to hold multiple words in our immediate awareness, to then begin to deeply comprehend what we're reading. And so fluency, you may have heard the phrase reading fluency, is your ability to decode at a sufficient enough rate that you can get the meaning out of what you are reading. So let's see here. All right, I'm going to pause here for a second before we decide before we demonstrate some of our procedures. So Sandy, do you want to summarize
me to
any
highlight?
questions? Yeah,
Sure.
or does anyone have any questions about the process of reading and the skills that are deployed during reading and comprehension?
So from some of the comments, we definitely have a few where parents were expressing difficulty hearing all the phonemes in a word and staying focused. We had some with difficulty with hearing phonemes, especially at an early age, and just having struggles later on, wanting to read. And there were some also issues with some spelling that people let us know.
Okay.
So one. So right. We are going to talk about that auditory processing piece. So
yeah. So why don't we do a few auditory processing drills? So let me see here. I'm going to share my screen again. Am I sharing the screen? No, you can't see it yet. All right. In order to demonstrate, I need a volunteer. Who is brave enough to be a volunteer to do a basic auditory processing drill with me? Who's going to be the volunteer? I know Amy will volunteer. I know Amy will volunteer.
Come on, Maria.
Maria will volunteer. All right, I don't have any volunteers. This is going to be a short demo.
Lorna is volunteering. Yay, Lorna.
Lorna's volunteering. All right, so Lorna, I'm going to do a drill with you that we call phoneme switch in our clinic. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a word and you're going to say the sounds backwards. So that is, you will say the first sound last, the last sound first. So if I say at, you would switch the last sound and the first sound, and you would say ta. So if I said Ed, what would you say?
De.
If I say Pab, what would you say?
Bap.
Okay. So now I'm going to ratchet up the difficulty a bit with and include some more sounds. So if I say the sound, let's see. How many sounds do you think you could do?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure?
My oven timer's going off. Can you just give me 1 second?
Yep. All right, so what I'm asking Lorna to do is to hear neurologically the sounds, analyze the sounds, and then manipulate them in a way. So when we train auditory processing, we train with fake words, made up words, because what we don't want the student to do is to resort to a memory of the word. So we use fake words that forces them to hear the distinct phonemes in the word and then do something with it. So Lorna, doff.
Fod.
Fob.
Boff.
Nop.
Pawn.
Nis.
Sin.
Nice. Thumb.
Muff.
Nice. Very good. So that's one way of working, and we do it in a very intense fashion with a metronome where the trainer is saying the word, a beat happens, the student then responds immediately with the response. And so you can imagine as you grow into the length of the word, you have to analyze more of the sounds and manipulate more of them. We start out initially with single or with double, with 2 sounds, move to 3 to 4, that kind of thing. All right, let's see. Let's do, I need another volunteer. And I think we're going to go. Who would like to be another volunteer? Do we have another volunteer? Sandy, you want to be my student?
Okay. Do you want me to mess up?
Do I want you to mess up?
Yeah.
Sure. You can do,
All right.
you can do that.
Well, it might be helpful to see how, what we would do if we did it incorrectly. How would we give feedback?
Okay. So, Sandy, can you see the ask us for a brain training demo on the screen? All right. So, this is what we call phoneme replace. So, I'm going to say a word. I want you to look at the bottom of the sheet. You'll see 5 vowel sounds. I, a, ah. Okay? I'm going to say a word, and then I want you to replace the vowel sound in the word with the vowels you see on the page. So if I say at, you would put the I sound in place of the a, and you would say what?
It.
Yep. Then I want you to replace the a sound with e.
Et.
Correct. Now do it with the rest of the vowels.
Ot. Ut. Oh.
You said ought. That's at.
Oh, at. Ut.
Okay. Yep.
Oat.
That's ought. You said oat. That's ought. All right, so I'm going to give you some bigger words. Ready? Licked.
Licked. Licked. Lacked. Lucked. Looked.
Locked. You said looked. I want locked. Say it 3 times.
Locked. Locked. Locked.
All right, nilp.
Milk.
No,
Milk.
nilp.
Nilp. Nelp. Nelp. Nulp. Nulp.
Nice. Great. So that's what we call phoneme replace. Let's do one more. Don, you got it. Do you have a favorite phoneme drill?
No, but I'm good at messing up.
You are?
Yeah, I'm better than Sandy at messing up.
All right. So let's do, this is the drill that's most difficult for our students. Can you guess which one I'm going to ask you to do?
Yes.
Phoneme analyze.
Yes.
So I'm going to give you a word, Don, and ask you to say that what the word would become with one of the sounds dropped out. For example, if I said at and asked you to say at without the t, you would say what?
Ah.
Okay. You would say ah. So I'm going to tell you which sound to drop out of the word, and you tell me what the new word would be. Okay? So if I give you the word licked and ask you to drop the first sound, what would you say?
Ick.
Correct. Biffed.
Drop the first sound again.
Yes.
If.
Okay, now I want you to drop the second consonant sound.
Second
Filled.
consonant.
Filled.
Fid.
Kilf.
Kif.
That's correct. Now I want you to drop the last sound. Milne.
Mill.
Tulp.
Say again.
Tulp.
Hope.
I want tull. You said tull.
Yeah,
Tulp.
it was hard to separate that vowel and that third consonant. Tope.
Yeah. Okay.
Pulp.
Try this one. Dunned.
Dud.
No. Dropping the last.
Oh,
So
the last.
dunned.
So done.
Done
Yeah.
is correct. All right. So now I'm going to give you 3 words. I want you to drop the first sound of the first word, the second sound of the second word, and the third sound of the third word, the
Can I
third
write it down?
consonant sound.
Will you let me? Can I write it down? Do we let him write it down?
No.
What?
All right. Salp.
Alp.
Telt.
Say it again.
Telt.
Tet.
Wamp.
Wham.
That's correct. Good
Holy
job, Don.
I'm sweating bullets.
That's good.
No, I really was trying. That was very hard. That was very hard.
Yeah.
Sargan, we had a question in the chat.
Okay.
Someone
right.
asked, what do you do if a student can't do any of these particular drills that we kind of demonstrated?
Well,
How would you break that down?
Yeah, so what I did just for the purposes of the demonstration tonight was to jump to some more complex levels where you could hear there were multiple sounds. When we start with auditory processing drills with our students, we start with a single code sound. So we start with we don't go to 4-letter words, 5-letter words right out of the gate, and we let them have early wins. So we truly are kind of drilling the basic single sounds before and making sure they have those before we start manipulating them. So does that answer the question? We have to meet the student where they are. Sandy, did you want to add anything else to that?
Yeah, I was just going to add, it's very structured what we do, and systematized. So we start we're building a scaffold, right, of skill. So we start everybody at a baseline and we make sure those skills are automatic so that when we add the next layer, then they're able to handle with more complexity the new skill. So what we're demonstrating here is kind of taken out of context just to show you how we would work on that auditory processing skill. But if you wanted to work on this at home, or even use a program like our ReadRx, which I'll put in the chat so you guys can look that up, know that it's very structured, very laid out, so that you're not
jumping show them
at a random spot and frustrating your children, because that would be a disaster.
So what you can see, whether we're in the clinic or whether we're working over Zoom, what we're doing is we are working one-on-one. The feedback loops are very quick so that the student can analyze what did they make a mistake, how to correct it, repeat it. And so in that drill-like fashion, we're building up the auditory processing before we start introducing the codes that make up our English language. The auditory processing is a key foundational skill. So, what if auditory processing isn't the problem? So, let's see here. So, in our clinic, we analyzed 1,400 plus children with a specific reading disability that can technically be known as dyslexia. And these are what we call the pre-assessment score. These are the baseline scores of those individuals who had the label of dyslexia. While we've been looking at auditory processing as being kind of the key underlying skill, we were surprised to find out, everyone thinks, that dyslexia is associated primarily with auditory processing deficit. But we found 3 other skills that were actually more deficit in that profile of struggling reader: long-term memory, processing speed, and working memory. So, a recent study actually found that the ability to retrieve phonological information from the long-term memory was the essential skill in being a proficient reader. So it's not just auditory processing skills, it's weaknesses in some of those other skill areas, the core cognitive skill areas that I showed in the learning model previously. Here's from that same study. This presentation was presented by Dr. Amy Moore, who's actually going to be a speaker at the HEAVE conference this summer. She presented the presidential poster session at the American Psychological Association, and this is what she presented. We found in that same study, so this is visual processing. These are percentiles using the Woodcock-Johnson, which is a standardized cognitive assessment tool. These are the profiles based on the age of the subject across their lifespan of those struggling readers. And what you see is it's actually not the auditory processing that is the key weakness. It's that working memory, the long-term memory, and the fluency, the processing speed that is the key. Those are the key weak skills in identified struggling readers. But what is most shocking about this discovery is not that these were the skills, but if you do not intervene to strengthen those skills actually get weaker as the student ages. So you can see a regression in the skills as the student goes out. And, there's a persistent myth among many parents that when your child has a reading struggle, just give it time, or he'll read when he's ready. What this research shows is that if the intervention doesn't happen soon enough, the reading ability actually declines as time goes out. And we know that, as you age, schoolwork gets harder, and that's a fairly concerning combination. The largest reading study ever commissioned was done with the Chicago public school system. And what they determined over tracking struggling readers in their system was that if you are not reading on grade level by 4th grade, there is a high likelihood, on the order of 75% chance, that the student will never be reading on grade level. So, intervening earlier is critically important to becoming a proficient reader. All right, so how do we combat this? Sandy, do you want to talk about how the reading intervention is, how systematic it is?
So I put a link in the chat for everybody, so you feel free to go look that up on the website, as well as some comprehension information and a blog that kind of talks about signs to look for if your child is struggling with reading. But like I mentioned before, the ReadRx program is systematized. So everybody starts at the very beginning, making sure that we really understand the basic codes that we use in words. So the first 22 sounds, I believe. And then we start adding into that our different vowels, short vowels, long vowels, our digraphs, and more complicated spellings and spelling rules. And it builds upon itself. And the reason why our program is the way it is because we are also targeting those other skill areas that Dargan mentioned earlier as well. So there's the auditory processing component of really understanding the sounds and the sound codes and how they apply. But then we're also adding a metronome to it. So we're going to build processing speed so that we can build that fluency rate with it so that students can decode with ease. We're going to add logic and reasoning to that. We're going to talk about different rules and why those rules apply, so that as we hold those rules in place, if we see a C next to an I, we understand it's going to make this sound versus the K next to an I, which would make the K sound. We're going to add that repetition so that we're building in that long-term memory and really getting it into the knowledge bank so that it is retrieved with ease. And we're adding even a working memory component because we're starting to really build those words into bigger and bigger words and expose them over and over again so that they're able to read with fluency and speed. It is intense, it's targeted and sequenced, and it's one-to-one. So we drill in short little bursts. And we have a lot of activities that we do. We only really showed you guys 3, but we have over 15 different read drills that we do to help build those skills.
Yeah, so Sandy, do you want to address how we use visualization as we move out of the auditory processing phase and into the basic code mastery, into the complex code mastery, how we use visualization?
Yep. So one of the key components to helping your student be able to remember those crazy English spelling rules is that we need to have a visual representation of what it looks like, not just a rote memorization. A lot of us have our I before E except after C, but even that rule doesn't always apply. And Logic of English has a lot of great tools in it to help you. If any of you have the Logic of English book, that really kind of breaks down English in a great way. But a fun way for kids to really learn and hold the spelling rules is to turn it into a visual picture that has a hook in your head that you can see. And so we often teach in pictures so that that hook can hold longer. You're going to hold a visual piece of information longer in that visual memory. So for example, we teach that is both in octopus and in watch. But in octopus, it's an O, and in watch, it's an A. And we might even talk about how that A is usually associated with that W, and we can hold that together. And the same thing with the oo sounds. That has a longer train, but we have that boot, that kick the glue, that I can't see the picture anymore.
It's a screw.
There's a screw. That's right. The glue spilled, and there's a screw that's holding a tulip that has a bowl of soup. So all the different ways to make that oo sound, and we drill it, and we have them hold that picture and really keep that picture in their mind's eye. We make that a story train with pictures so that they can see it. And then when we ask them to spell a word that they're not familiar with, for example, if they were wanting to spell the word blue, we might then associate it with the story. Blue is like the glue spilled, and kind of hold those together in a spelling family. And that really helps to start building that knowledge bank piece, which is what you're trying to do. You want to give hooks so that students can remember why, and what families and patterns go together.
Yeah. So this is why English is the hardest language to master. So you have 7 different ways the oo sound is encoded. That's what we call spelling. It's in visual symbols associated with the sound. And what these these pictures that we associate when we're training the codes for that sound, this is basically a probability chart. So the most predominant way the oo sound is spelled in the English language is the double O. The least likely is the O, E, the E, so the O with the E. But as the pictures gradually get smaller and work left to right, what this allows the student is, if you are going to have to guess, you might as well guess with the most likely spelling. So it works from the most likely to the least likely spelling. And we do that with all of the complex codes. There are multiple sounds in our language that have many, many ways in which they are spelled. And so, like Sandy says, if you can add a probability chart to them encoding what they hear, they're more likely to get it right. So,
We have a good
that's
question, Dargan. Sophia
okay.
asked, how often do you need to work with a student to get them to reading at a proficient level?
Well, that's a bit of a loaded question because we don't know what the baseline of the student is. Where are the flat tires? I can say, and that's what the assessment process does. I mean, we looked at all of these skills that go into being a proficient reader, and you have to ask yourself, where is my child's flat tire? Where is the weakness that is causing that frustration loop? And so, knowing where your child is struggling, what skill or what skills, plural, is the first step. And then understanding how are they demonstrating in everyday life, what symptomatically is presenting itself in the struggle of the reading. That gives you an idea of how intense, how long does an intervention need to be? Are we losing 5 pounds or 55 pounds? Those are 2 very different engagements if you go to a personal trainer at a gym. I will say that in order for any training to be successful versus instruction, right? You use curriculum to instruct. Training is very different. Skill building is very different, that it needs to be frequent. We train typically 3 times a week with our students. Like if you're going to go to the gym and rehabilitate a hip or change your flexibility or body mass index, you have to do it frequently. Everything we do is based on neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to change with frequent, targeted, intense, and lengthy enough stimulation so that new neural pathways are created. So when the child looks at the codes, the decoding is automatic. It happens automatically. And so regardless of whether it takes 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, it's the frequency, the intensity, the targeting, and the doing it long enough to change the pathway so that they look at the code, boom, the sounds come. They glue the sounds. They're reading, fluently, but so that's a long-winded way of saying, well, it depends on which skills and how deficit. All right, so what is, when you do deploy an intense intervention, we looked at, thousands of students who came to us with reading disabilities. The blue bars are where they placed in the various the various reading skills out of the Woodcock-Johnson. These are the blue bars of the core cognitive skills. So you can see, anything below the 38th percentile is clinically considered a deficit. So you can see where these individuals come to us, where they're deploying, what skill levels they are demonstrating, kind of percentiles compared to others their age, and then understanding where the weaknesses are, administering the training. You can see the purple bars are where they test and demonstrate at the conclusion of this intense intervention, which is a radically different tool set than they had when they came in. And these are just the clinical marks. The marks you and I and Don live on are the everyday life changes being reported by the parents who say, oh my God, he asked me to take him to Barnes and Noble to get Harry Potter. I about fell out of my chair. And so that's what this leads to, competence that then breeds confidence. So that is, we talked about the assessment being a key thing. A lot of you guys may not know, we've had a relationship with HEAVE for years, which provides the initial evaluation so you understand which processing skills may be holding your child back, as well as a consultation meeting with one of us for $99. I know in my center we normally do that for $249. So the savings actually pays for the HEAVE membership, I think. So now, as we start to wrap up, I'd like to open it for questions. Turn on your mics, ask questions. You have 3 very experienced people on the call, and we can talk specifically about things you're seeing.
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead, Marie.
Okay.
Because I'm gonna forget if I don't ask now. Okay, so I know we're learning about reading. So
Yes.
my question is about my daughter. She's in speech therapy. So my question is, she's been going for a couple of months, and I feel like she's not learning maybe as fast as I thought she would. My question is, could it be possible that it's her processing speed and her working memory? Because her speech therapist did mention something about her forgetting after a few minutes, and then they have to go back and review. So that's just kind of like, I feel like some thoughts are like connecting for me right now.
Yeah, that is, my dad had a saying, if you don't ask the right question, you will get the wrong answer 100% of the time. The key before picking an intervention for your child is to know what are the you need to target the intervention to the weakness. We get so many people who come into our clinic and say, oh, we've been at speech for years, or we've been in tutoring for years, and then we test them and find that their working memory is in the 5th percentile. They will need a tutor their entire life, and because it's just pouring water into the bucket that has like, if you don't patch the holes in the bucket, then the response to the intervention is going to be suboptimal. And you run the risk of demoralizing the child because the expert said this would work for me. And if it's not targeted at the right deficit, the child begins to think, I am broken. And then they are like not the reader, and they eject from learning. And that's all of our biggest fears. All of us have children. For them to eject from learning before they get an education, can demonstrate their full potential. And so I don't I don't know what your daughter, I don't know her at all. I can't say is that's the wrong. I mean, obviously you enrolled her in speech for something. I don't know if it's because of articular or motor issues or, but the speech folks and the occupation that come to us and they look at our memory tools and they go, oh my God, if I only had those in my clinic, my cases would be much shorter. But so we're very familiar with having people come to us after frustrating progress with other interventions.
Yes. No, everything you said makes a lot of sense. Like, I was present for the first presentation that you guys did, the third, and then obviously this one. So with a lot that I'm hearing, I feel like there's more that has to be worked with her. And it kind of saddens me that I never knew this, and I'm like, if I knew all of this before, maybe it could have helped her. But
Well,
I'm glad I'm learning
Maria,
about
we don't look backwards. We are where
right.
we are today, and we have to think positive about I have moms who come in and say, I should never have drunk that bottle of red wine when I was pregnant. I'm like, no, we can't do anything about that. We are looking forward, and know what we know. So don't beat yourself up about it. Who the heck's ever heard of neuroplasticity and brain track, right? I mean,
I know.
that's what we're trying to do with Heave. I look on the Facebook pages and I see these moving cries for help of my child can't do this. And guess what? The typical top of mind response from those who are trying to help this mother, it's typically curriculum recommendations.
Yes, that's true.
It's not, oh my gosh, we need to know if his working memory is strong enough. Instead, moms spend all this time switching curriculums looking for response to a cognitive weakness. And so again, the child goes, oh my God, my third curriculum in math, I must be a terrible math kid. And so, but it's how, again, we can't beat ourselves up because we haven't known about this for, we're on the cutting edge now of understanding. It may not be the curriculum. It may not be your teaching method, your pedagogical model. It may be the processor. And if it is, you need tools to target the processor.
That's
Does that make
correct.
sense?
Oh, yes, it does. And thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
so one of the things that we talked to you about in the consultation after you've done the assessment, it's not just the skills and the weaknesses, but the difference between those things. Like a slow processor, a difficult working memory, but high auditory can be very confusing because those kids a lot of times can by sight, they can memorize those words and tell you what those words are, but then when you ask towards comprehension, they can't do it. So sometimes it's the difference in those tested skills that we can explain to you. Yes, I know he does that, but it's because here and here, these are high skills that we routinely see at both my centers. Visual readers. I can memorize those words and I know how to adapt and adjust in school because the rules are this. So I can keep bumping along like this until that child gets into middle school, until that kid gets into high school. And then those skills, because of the load that's expected of them, it doesn't work anymore. That's when the wheels come off the bus for them. That's where those old skills just don't quite get them to where they are. And a lot of times, I mean, honestly, I don't know if Sandy and Dargan, the hardest student we train is the 6th or 7th grade boy that can't read. They're entrenched in their workaround. Don't make me change what's been working for me because that works for me and I can survive. And a lot of times we get, you get these very upset boys because you're asking them to change because of the way we train. Their brain is getting better in areas and we have to basically convince them that now they have another skill set that they can draw from. They don't have to keep pulling from the same place anymore. Now they've got, like Dargan said earlier, they have more tools in their toolbox to be able to not just read better, but do math better. Like reading affects math because there are word problems. You got to be able to figure out what you're reading to answer the math, right? So, it's the combination of things that assessment really will help you understand with. And I know we've talked about that a couple times, but it's invaluable to be able to
Yeah,
understand what's working, not working, why it's not working, because the difference is there. It's a great investment in your son or your daughter. It really is.
I saw a question, Don. I think in the initial when we asked you guys, someone said that if it's longer than a sentence or two,
Mm.
they protest and and so again, I don't know this individual, but when I hear the symptoms that are being reported, probably poor fluency. And that means fluency is accuracy and pace. It's a accuracy mark and a speed mark. And so what looks to us like 2 or 3 sentences, if you have slower processing speed, looks like War and Peace. And so what you get is a behavioral response to, oh my god, not, no way. You get this little soul who has inadequate tools that, like, oh my god, she's asking me to read War and Peace when it's really 3 sentences, and they are just coping with the frustration in the best way, their little immature self. No, they're not being bad kids, they're just crying for help, that I don't have the tools to do what I'm being tasked to do. And that resorts into all kinds of antisocial, and I mean, they're little guys, and, some withdraw, some act out, some run away. And those are all very normal responses to, I don't have the processing tools to do this learning task in front of me. And different personalities vent it in different ways. So,
And remember too, your kids can't tell you why this is hard. And that's why an assessment tool is super helpful, because that can get that drilled down. Their only perception is how they see the world and how they function in the world. So they don't know that their memory is dumping. And so they might say, I don't remember. And oftentimes as parents, we feel like sometimes it's behavioral, or, they're just not being obedient and they're not listening, or they're not focusing, but they might have a leaky bucket in that memory skill and really cannot hold that information longer than 1 second or 2 seconds, when they really need to be able to hold it for 5. So having that tool in your back pocket is just super helpful. Same with auditory processing. We've talked a lot about reading here, but when auditory processing is weak, that affects your listening comprehension by a huge degree. So not only just listening to instructions from you as the parent, or listening to instructions in an online class that they're taking or in a co-op, but it's going to affect them down the road if they have to take a class at a college level and they're having to process that auditory information and take notes. All that stuff starts to bog down when auditory processing is weak, along with those other skills. So on the early education side, we've got the phonemic awareness and really understanding how sounds and sound codes work. But later on in life, auditory processing can be a huge debilitator for an adult because of the listening comprehension piece that we don't often talk about.
And quite honestly, we've talked about the kids all night long. At the end of the day, this has a lot to do with your day-to-day and your stress level.
Yes.
You see your child struggling, and you have to deal with it. I mean, you're in the trenches if you're a homeschooler. We homeschooled. It was tough. There were some days are harder than others, but really, if you can see your kid struggling, find out how you can address what those root issues are, what the root cause of those things are. Guess what happens to your stress level when their stress level changes? This applies for you too, honestly, and you shouldn't feel guilty about that. A lot of times people are like, well, I know, but you're dealing with a lot of stress homeschooling somebody who's a struggling learner. So when they get better, your stress level gets better. Honest to God, it really does.
Yeah, if you can take away one thing, and it's why I do what I do, educating the parent so they make the right choice. Is it curriculum? Is there a weakness I need to intervene, or do I need to bring in the disciplinary? Like, if you don't know, you're just guessing at, and I just, I want parents to be aware so they make the best choice for their family. And it could be to intervene or not intervene, but at least know what you're working with so you can appropriately choose for them.
And your kids are wired to learn.
They are.
So that'll be my final thought on the night. But God has wired them to learn. There are different tools that need to be discerned that you would need to help them learn with ease. But a child who's frustrated has mismatched tools. And when he's got the right tools, he won't be frustrated. She won't be frustrated. They'll be excited about learning, because you see that when they're young, they're excited about learning. But when that frustration kicks in, it's because the tool's not right. And then they start to take that on in their confidence and self-esteem. And then we start getting the pushback. So they're wired to learn. The puzzle for us is to figure out the missing link and to give them the right tool so that they can learn.
Somebody asked about just found out about the sessions this afternoon. I think you'll get a follow-up email after tonight, and it'll probably have all of the maybe tomorrow it'll have all of the recordings for the previous sessions. It will also have a survey, and what you guys think about the the benefit of what we have shared over the last month. It is so important to heave leadership. I would just ask, I mean, we've spent a lot of time, sharing with you, trying to make, if you would share your honest opinions in that, we provide that to heave leadership, and it allows us to be able to come back next year and to give more, educational programs to heave members. So don't just oh, it's just a survey, it doesn't matter. They read every single response, and that's critical. So if you could fill that out, they would greatly appreciate that.
And
All
just
right.
remember, we will be at HEAP this summer. We will have a booth, and Dr. Amy, who we've sent some videos where she spoke, that she's our clinical psychologist that works with us from the Gibson Research Institute. She's actually going to be a speaker at HEAP this year, and we're super excited. So you'll see us around. Please stop by our table and say hi.
Yeah, there's a great video of her she did for Heave about why reading the English language is the toughest and why most reading interventions fail. Some of these slides came from that. I encourage, it's 20 minutes. It's eye-opening. And so it's in your email that you got reminding you of this. It was
It's
your
also
homework.
in the thread, and I put it in the chat too. So if
Okay.
you go back real quick before we close it out and just kind of click on all those links and save them for later, you'll have all those ready at your fingertips.
All right, guys, have a blessed evening. Thank you for your time and interest in making things easier for your child. And if any of us can ever be of help, you see how accessible we are and how passionate we are about helping the kids who are falling through the cracks. So
Thank you.
you guys have a great evening, okay?